Hi, I'm Shelley, and this is my channel, The Willow Tree Queen. I talk about sewing and crafting and anything really that comes to mind. So far, it's been mostly sewing because it's my main hobby, and I'm a little bit obsessed, as I've mentioned in my channel bio. Today, I've bought myself a microphone, so this is a bit of a test to see if the microphone is working, and hopefully, you can hear me a bit better than you might have done in previous vlogs. And I thought to give it a good old test, I would do a talky type of vlog. And so I'm going to talk about 10 things that I do or don't do that in sewing that are considered bad. So I've written myself some notes so I don't forget what I'm trying to say. And so I may be looking down from time to time. So this all came about because I'm actually procrastinating from finishing my husband's shirt, which is sitting here in front of me. And as I was putting the new colour thread in my machine, I looked at the needle that's in there, which is currently, I think it's a fine needle, so it's a like microtex type needle, and this is actually a cotton canvas, so it's quite a bit thicker. And I thought to myself, should I change the needle? And then I thought, nah, can't be bothered. So my first thing that I do that is considered bad is use appropriate needles. I don't do that very often. I, in fact, only recently discovered what the numbers on needles meant. I think it was Beyond the Pink Door when they sent through some microtex needles that I actually finally understood what the 10/whatever stood for. So I am a fairly new sewist. I've only really started sewing in February, March 2023. So I haven't been sewing that long. I have been using a sewing machine for a number of years just to sew things onto junk journals and stuff, but not to make garments. So I had no idea about the needles thing, and I am still lazy about it. I won't change the needle. I'm getting a little bit better at it, but often I will just use whatever's in there because I'm lazy. Funny story, actually. A couple of years ago, I was having problems with the machine. Not this one. It was a machine before I upgraded, and it was skipping stitches. It was having lots of issues. And recently, when I gifted it to my oldest son, and he was changing the needle on it, we realized that I'd actually put the needle in back to front. So you may know that needles have a flat side and a curved side. And yeah, I had put the flat side facing out. Anyway, strangely enough, putting that correctly made everything work right. So if you're having problems with your machine and you haven't actually checked, just make sure that you've got the needle in the right way around. The second thing that I don't do is I don't clean my machines, especially after every project. I know that a lot of the time people say you don't need to clean your machines that frequently. They do get full of dust, and it does depend on the quality of the materials that you're using to make a thing, but I will rarely clean it afterwards. I think the exception would be if I was using fleece, because it gets so fluffy and the overlocker gets full. But I'm quite bad at cleaning my machine. It's usually only if I have a problem, it'll become a last resort. I don't cut out carefully. So number 3 is cutting out carefully. If you've watched any of my previous vlogs, you may have noticed that I have to do all my cutting out on my living room floor. I don't have a great deal of floor space to do it, and I don't have the table space to cut out. So I'll lay my fabric on the floor, put the pattern pieces down, and then I'll cut around them on the floor, which generally means that I'm in an uncomfortable position. I'm doing yoga, basically, and I just want to get it over with as quickly as possible. So if I have left a little bit of a gap between the pattern piece and the fabric, or if I have not quite done it exactly to the pattern, I'm not that bothered. I do sometimes also not mark every single notch because I think some of them are a bit unnecessary. So yeah, I'm not very good at that. Again, the longer I sew for, the better I'll get at that. But as I'm doing it on the floor, I'm not that bothered, and it hasn't worked out too badly for me. Cutting on the bias. So this is another one. I will regularly, if the pattern tells me to do something on the bias, I won't necessarily do it. There are 2 reasons for that. One is I generally have limited amounts of fabric, And cutting on the bias, which is on the 45-degree angle, takes up a lot more fabric space than the regular on the fold or just regular grain. So if I have a limited amount of fabric, I'll just cut it on the straight grain. The obviously cutting on the bias gives it some mechanical stretch, which helps with certain things, and obviously makes it drapier when you're using woven fabrics. I, again, have not had that much of a problem. In fact, one of my favourite patterns, which is McCall's M769, which is it was quite the viral dress when it was first came out. I'll put a picture up here. I've made quite a few of these. I absolutely love it. I love the big sleeves, but the front is sort of a mock crossover, and the front binding for the crossover, they tell you to cut on the bias, but then they get you to put iron interfacing on it, which completely takes away any mechanical stretch that you might get. So it's like, what's the point in that? So that one especially, I won't cut it on the bias. Turning the page. So next is I won't pin or clip my fabrics as I put them under the machine. So I do currently have this one pinned, but that is mostly because I'm trying to fix a problem with it, which I blame the pattern for, not my shoddy workmanship. If I'm putting it under the machine, especially if it's a straight seam, I just hold the fabric together. I don't bother to pin it beforehand. I do sometimes do it when it's a curve, but even then, sometimes I won't bother pinning it. It seems fine. A lot of the time, the fabric will hold itself together anyway, and I'm going usually slow enough that I can correct it if it goes wrong. But pinning and stitching, if I don't need to, I won't. Just won't do it. The next thing that I often skip or don't do is iron or press my seams as I sew them. I have, again, if you've seen my video about my sewing space, it's very limited. I'm in my living room and space is at a premium. So if I can get away with not getting my ironing board out, I will. So quite often I won't iron the seams or press the seams. I will do it at the end. I will get the ironing board out and then give it one final press. But often I won't bother, especially with things like double gauze or whatever. I think it actually ruins it a little bit. So yeah, I rarely, well, it depends. At the weekend, I'll have my ironing board up all the time and I'm okay with it. But a lot of the time, I'll just sew and I won't worry about it. I was a bit of a convert to pressing. I've just made a note here because it really does make a difference. So I don't necessarily recommend any of these things. But if you want to save time, it's not going to break your project. It might make it slightly less neat, but if you press it at the end, it's going to be fine. Another thing that I don't do, and I think there's a few of us out there that don't do this, is use 2 rows of gathering stitches. It does look neater. It definitely helps you get more even gathers. There are definite benefits to it. It uses up a lot of thread. And I know a lot of people will use a different contrasting thread, but that would require me to change my thread, which again, I'm not going to do that. So I don't do it. I've written, does it look better? Yes. Is it time consuming? Also yes. So basically, I'm not going to do it. I've not really had a problem. I think if I was doing something extra special, I would take the time to do 2 rows, but a lot of the time, I'm not that bothered. So. The next thing that I often don't do is follow pattern instructions. I am a fairly new sewer, but I'm also the sort of person that will just make things up, will just fly by the seat of my pants, I guess you could say. And after I've done something a couple of times, I pretty much think I know how to do it. Whether that's true or not is another thing. But I'll scan the pattern, the instructions before I make something. But then while I'm making it, if it's straightforward, I won't read them again. I'll just do it. This does occasionally lead to some significant unripping, seam ripper moments. But most of the time, I get away with it. And it's, if you know how to put a collar on, just put the collar on. If you try and follow the instructions and it's slightly different to what you're used to, you're probably going to end up more confused than not. And if you know how to put a sleeve in the round and it's telling you to do it in the flat, do it in the round. A lot of the time I don't like doing that corner piece, where the arm and the side seam meet. So I will just do it my way, and most of the time it works out. Sometimes, though, it does lead to unpicking. So next, I will rarely use the recommended seam allowance. Usually patterns are 5/8 of an inch, which I think is 1.5 centimeters off the top of my head, and it is a big seam allowance. And I'm often not sure about the fit because I am wide in the hips, and often patterns I have to grade through so many different sizes sometimes. So I will usually use the width of my presser foot, or if it's jersey or knit fabric and I'm using my overlocker, I'll just do the width of the overlocker seam. I won't worry about it. And this does, of course, lead to slightly larger garments than what was in the pattern, but I haven't had a problem with that, and often it works in my favour. If I need to, I can always take it in. So yeah, seam allowances, I just think a lot of the time it's a massive waste of fabric. So next is, so this is linked to cutting on the bias. Often pattern instructions will give you arrows of which way to cut a pattern piece based on the fabric grain that you're using. And I am a spontaneous sewer, I guess is how you could describe it. I will sew because I feel like it. I rarely plan. I never buy fabric for a specific project. I just use what I have. I buy fabric. I'll buy like 2 or 3 meters depending on the cost of the fabric because I'm cheap. And I will just use what I have in my stash. So if I don't have enough fabric and they're telling me to cut something in a certain direction, I will ignore that and I will cut it however I need to. Again, I think a lot of people do this. And it does link to that on the bias, because on the bias is very much fabric hungry. But I will just use what I've got and put the patterns on there and fit it in somehow. So yeah, so basically that's how I work. I have been converted for some things that I never did before. I am still learning in my sewing journey. I'm a fairly, I think, what's that, 1.5 years-ish, slightly more or less than 1.5 years. So as I progress and become more involved in sewing, then it may well change. But at the moment, those are the things that I don't do that are considered bad in the sewing community, I think. What do you do? Do you do the same things as me? Are there any other things that you do that speed up your projects? Give me some tips. If there's anything else that you'd want to mention, then please let me know. Put a comment down below. Hopefully this was interesting and it worked and was not too bad. So yeah, give this a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be back again with a new video soon, and hopefully I won't have a cold then. So thanks for watching. Bye.